What's up, you lazy, entitled, basement-dwelling millennials, bootstrapping boomers, apathetic Xers, and goddamn Gen Z kids today? We've got the Nick Powers to make socialist policies happen here. In our continuing series about the reality of socialism, its history, its stigmas, its rise, its fall, and its attempts at resurgence here in recent years, we're wanting to talk about how it would look today if we got it implemented, the effects it would have, and the real steps we can take to make that happen. And thankfully, I reached out to Nick yesterday, and he was available today to join us. Nick Powers does some amazing statistical work on just how everything in the United States, social and economic and political systems work. He sets up some great spreadsheets and makes them available to everybody, and just has the real hard raw data that's really hard to argue with when it comes to these topics. So we're really glad to have him on. And can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I mean,
yeah, thanks for having me on. I do my best when it comes to the statistical analysis and data portion of it. So yeah, I think most people, especially most of my mutuals, know me from TikTok. But I'm also an author. I have a book out called "As the Pizza Burns" that was published in 2016. It's a fiction, but it's about customer service workers. I also have an upcoming painting show called "Fuck It, Let's Paint." And yeah, I try to, yeah, thanks. I try to make all sorts of content, not just math-based content, so that way if people get tired of gloom and doom all the time, they can at least find something fun to do.
it's like my Friday science videos and Sunday drinking videos.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And even as a creator, I get tired of doom and gloom all the time. And I also get tired of just arguing with people about things that I said in previous videos all the time. So it's nice to switch things up.
And it's, nobody wants to be just constantly generating the apathy, all the time, like the apathy generator all the time. Like, nobody wants to be that guy. So,
yes.
So for the people listening on the podcast here, we're doing a TikTok live for the first time while recording, just to see kind of how that goes. So
while we're having audio issues.
It's a
great day.
So yeah, no, I agree. I think that as creators, it gets really easy to get sucked into that. The world's falling apart. We need to talk about all of the things going wrong all the time because we're constantly exposed to us, and we constantly have people reaching out to us asking us to cover whatever thing that they think is important and needs attention at the moment. And a lot of it is, and a lot of times it's just hard for us to give it all. But if we don't kind of take a break from it and the doom and gloom, you get burnt out and you go from all to nothing. So it's that breakup with painting stuff or drinking stuff or that kind of stuff that really makes a big difference.
Yeah, exactly.
We're here to talk about sorry guys, we got a delay too, so it's gonna be great on the post side. About what realistic kind of socialist policies would look like today in the United States. Because we've had some, and when we say socialist, we're not talking, Karl Marx. We're just talking.
I mean, we kind of are in the broader sense of social equality, which is a huge tenet of socialism.
Seizing the means of production or worker-owned production. That aspect is shared.
But there's a lot of steps kind of in between here and there that we can take that people call socialism. They're more just social policies that take a lot of those big steps in that direction, and things that we used to have, FDR era socialism. We've seen it work in the past, and a few of the kind of policies I think that are worth getting into again, talking about is obviously student debt and education cost reforms, universal health care or some sort of offering of state health insurance, child care, parental leave, housing and homelessness. We could end privatized prisons and have a more community-focused judicial system, rehabilitation system. Better funding and grant options for co-op and private business. And There's a lot of things. What are some of the big ones that you think we should really be focusing on here that are the most achievable and would have the biggest impacts?
So I think one of the most achievable in the short term is, of course, increasing minimum wage, ensuring that wages, not just minimum wage, but ensuring that different businesses of different sizes and different profit margins have their own unique minimum wage as well. I also think that deprivatizing prisons is a huge one. I think that's something that's doable in the next 8 years. That would help so much. We could also increase the coverage of Medicare or Medicaid. Those systems already exist, right? That would. I mean, of course, we have to battle the fact that once we start increasing public healthcare options, then we also have to decrease private healthcare options. And a lot of course, like there is the conservative argument where a lot of people will be losing their jobs, but a lot of people will be gaining those jobs in the public sector. These are all immediate. These are all things that we could accomplish in the next 8 to 10 years. Even statistically, when we look at it,
on the point of losing jobs, keeping jobs around that make everybody's life worse isn't necessarily a good thing either.
Right.
Like, we don't keep, switchboard operators for
Exactly.
the phones around just because we needed to keep the jobs around. Like, that's not, if it's not a job
Exactly.
that adds to economic power or adds to people's lives or serves a purpose, there's no point in having it.
and there's the argument of universal basic income as well. If we have universal basic income, the loss of jobs, no matter what sector, won't matter as much because people will still be able to survive without the people will still be able to survive without necessarily having to work in the same field as they were before, or even have to work in general. When businesses change and society evolves, we won't have to worry about, what happens if this specific sect collapses? It's fine because those people will be able to still have income. They'll still be able to survive.
See, now, I've always had a little bit of hesitation with universal basic income. I think targeted basic income would be effective, but I think universal basic income would increase inflation to the point where it would negate itself. If demand or if supply doesn't change and the supply of money goes up, or demand doesn't change and the supply of money goes up, everything is just going to adjust to meet that amount. But if you had targeted basic income where anybody making less than a certain amount of money or everybody who was in a specific situation, or you had targeted programs of making sure that everybody had a minimum access to housing and food and all of that kind of stuff, then it wouldn't have the broad economic effect where, everybody gets $1,000 a month and therefore demand doesn't change, supply doesn't change, everything just goes up by $1,000 a month because they have that ability to spend that extra $1,000 until it negates itself.
Honestly, you're 100% right. When I say universal basic income, I know that that's the wrong thing to say, but mainly I say it in a public setting because that's what people understand. If we start talking about targeted basic income, a lot of people don't necessarily know what that means, and I should start adapting that phrasing so that way people can just learn. But that was my mistake.
Okay, no, cool. You are I expected if you supported universal basic income, you had about 14 spreadsheets behind it to tell me why I was wrong for not supporting it. So I appreciate it.
Especially since we're about to talk about universal health care, the universal basic income conversation's a whole thing. And it's gonna it's something that's going to trigger a lot of feelings, not just with us, but with people watching and listening. Because I've done the math on universal basic income several times, and unless it's targeted, it's not only do we run into problems like you were talking about with inflation, but we also run into the problems of affordability, because we have to pay for it somehow. It's a problem that we can solve, but it comes with a lot of steps that a lot of people aren't necessarily willing to listen to.
No, I mean, and anytime you start talking about giving poor people money, slightly less poor people get really mad about people having less than them getting, a free meal or something, and that it's always an uphill climb.
Oh my God, yeah, yep.
Well, not even just the slightly, less poor people, the bourgeoisie, they start seeing poor people get given money and having their boot lifted off their neck for, a couple days or a week, and then all of a sudden they have a choice in what they want to do with their life, and all of a sudden their whole power structure starts to get a little bit less solidified.
You know what? The
Oh, no,
wealthy
that's
people
true.
worked hard by being born into a wealthy family and being lended millions and millions of dollars to start their businesses. And if you can't pull yourself up by
Right.
your bootstraps like that, then why the fuck should my tax dollars go to help you?
You're right. You're right.
Being born poor was your decision, okay? You got to live with that decision.
Exactly.
Right. And if you can't afford a house right now, you should have been born in 1969 and bought a house in 1980.
That was just being lazy about your birth
Right.
year. It's
Or
not our
whatever.
fault you couldn't
Exactly.
show up on time. All right. Getting back onto this was kind of one of the big things I wanted to talk with you about, because this is one that just I don't want to say passion. I am passionate about it, but something that just gets under my skin.
Does it grind your gears?
It grinds my gears. You know what grinds my gears? Is universal health care. People who are real pro-capitalism get real bitchy about it being socialist. We can't be paying for everybody's health care, and that's not the way that the world works, except it works that way everywhere else in the world.
And here, too, in other areas.
Universal health care would be one of those things that would support free market capitalist society. A free market exists or a capitalist free market exists with competition, and competition is really hindered by the fact that we have privatized healthcare, because that stops people from starting jobs or shopping around employers or working for a small business that can't provide health care. And obviously, it stifles spending in the economy, because when you're spending hundreds or even $1,000s a month on insurance premiums and deductibles and out-of-pocket costs for health care, you can't spend that on stuff that actually stimulates the economy. And then there's just obviously the fact that like 68,000 people a year less would die. $450
Right.
billion a year we would save on what we spend, and people would just generally be healthier and happier, and that makes them more productive. But I was curious if you had kind of some of the numbers, because I haven't found the numbers on how much that would genuinely affect the economy and, free market capitalism that every true red-blooded American loves.
Yeah, so when you when you told me about that this morning, or last night, and I saw it this morning, I went ahead and grabbed some numbers and put it in my state-by-state spreadsheet. We should have tested this out before.
All about lab testing here.
We're all about figuring it out as we go today.
Full transparency.
I took a couple of hours this morning to look at food insecurity by state. I went and grabbed healthcare stats and Medicaid stats by state, including how much people pay for healthcare, deductibles and premiums, whether or not the Medicaid expansion has been adopted, and the populations on Medicaid. I went ahead and did a lot of math this morning to figure out how much people are paying for Medicaid in every state. Not only the average taxpayer paying for what the overall population gets, but also how much that would cost the individual on Medicaid. Like how much it costs total for that individual to be on Medicaid versus how much it would cost for that individual to be on private insurance. I did this in every state, and let me go grab some stats real quick. Give me a state that you want me to talk about. Let's say, what state you want me to talk about?
Hey, we love our state of Minnesota.
Yeah, Minnesota, cool. So Minnesota, the yearly cost of insurance on average in Minnesota is about $18,000. So if you're making $40,000 a year, then
That's employer cost and employee cost, I'm guessing?
Yeah, well, that's the amount that the average person pays. That's not necessarily taken into account. Well, actually, no. I can go back and look, but no, I think it is the average that your employer also pays. It's the overall cost of insurance. It's not just the amount taken out of your check.
Sure.
But yeah, the average person is on the average insurance policy per person is about $18,000 a year. Compare that to the total yearly cost of Medicaid per person, and these are all estimates, and they're all broken down just by the math of the populations that I found, and they're all sourced in the spreadsheet if you want to go look at it. But versus the cost of Medicaid, which is about $12,000, which means the cost of Medicaid, if everybody that has insurance switched, if Medicaid opened up to everybody, and everybody who currently has insurance switched to Medicaid, they would only be paying 66% of what they're paying for insurance. They'd save on average $509 a person per month.
Assuming the employer pays maybe 2/3 of that, you're probably still getting an extra $100 to $200 in your paycheck a month. I mean, that's a couple percent raise right off, like just right at the top.
No, yeah, exactly. It is. But also, we have to keep in mind that if we switch to a universal basic healthcare model, employers wouldn't have to pay for that either. Employers wouldn't have to pay that, parts of the insurance premium. So we could legislate wages going up at the same time.
I would disagree in that they're probably still paying for it through some sort of tax, maybe not a direct like dollar amount, like per employee.
Well, that's true.
Per insured employee. So in that sense, they're just also receiving a reduction in that cost to their business through the socialized taxation that I assume we would need to fund something like that.
Yeah, they'd still be paying less. And again, these are all just basic estimates that I threw together this morning. On average, the person would say, on average, a person in Minnesota would save about $500 a month, not counting all of the aforementioned things, but they'd still be saving several $100s every month.
Right, and sound like I'm being the Debbie Downer here. I'm just pointing out this is the way that
who's going to pay for it?
It will cost it will cost money to society to provide the universal healthcare service.
Yeah, but it will be incredibly more affordable.
Right, it'll be cheaper for society, and there won't be that stigma of having healthcare tied to your employer or just should you go to the doctor or not, because will I go into bankruptcy if I go to the doctor, or can I afford this procedure?
Yeah.
And also, that doesn't factor in deductibles either.
Yeah, no, exactly. If you actually have to go to the doctor.
Exactly. And I didn't have time to factor out deductibles this morning.
Oh, yeah.
That would be quite a task. I don't know if you have those numbers available, but
I've got deductibles for insurance, but I don't have Medicaid yet. I was going to look into the average amount that people actually spend towards their deductible on insurance and factor all that out, but I didn't have enough time this morning. But deductibles, needless to say, are very high on private insurance. So
right.
Yeah, so you'd still be you'd save a bunch of money on top of that that we're not even counting right now.
And then prescriptions as well. I'm sure you'd save a lot of money because there's usually a copay with that kind of thing.
Yeah, copays for prescriptions. This also isn't counting all of the extra care that people would want to get if they had access to mental health treatments and that sort of thing. If we assumed that a public option would allow for therapy or allowed for psychiatry or things like that, that private insurance is a big battle to cover. Not only would, of course, you'd be spending a little bit more for that, but people would have the extra care while saving money.
Yeah, and so they'd end up being healthier and getting care, in theory, quicker a lot of times because getting approved for these kinds of things. I know people always bitch about, or people in America always think that, socialized medicine ends up taking forever, and, you're waiting 6 months to get your broken leg fixed type of thing, but you wait really long periods of time for a lot of procedures here too, and a lot of that is just arguing with what the insurance companies will or won't cover.
Yeah, and I mean there is that stigma about universal health care, but right now the people on Medicaid and Medicare, in many instances, they go to the same doctors as they did on their previous insurance. So the wait time is going to be very likely the same.
Right. Yeah, I'd never really understood that. If you already have a, what do they call it, established care or whatever, and so like your appointment time is your appointment. Like the doctor doesn't have to do anything that much different dealing with an insurance company versus
Right.
the government. So how does just changing it all to government
I
automatically, make things take 50% longer?
to be fair, I think that the argument or the thought process comes from if it's free or very low cost, people are going to use it more because, people probably should be using their healthcare more.
Got
But if they're
it.
using it more, then you have
Less availability.
And I
So
think that's where it comes
that
from.
just means all the jobs that we
Right.
might lose, we're just going to need more doctors and more
Doctors,
people
nurses,
to do those
clinic
things.
stuff,
So there you
yeah.
go. There's your jobs back.
Exactly.
High-paying jobs too.
So if we did enact some sort of universal health care, then we could also legislate within that series of bills a legislation allowing more power to these programs to negotiate prices with pharma. So we can have decreased costs in medicines, decreased costs in equipment, that sort of thing.
And one of the things that always gets brought up too about kind of removing some of the capitalism out of healthcare is that it'll stifle innovation and all of this. And one of the things that I usually point out is that we can usually achieve anything as a government we're willing to fund as a country. I mean, most of the big technological advances have been through public funding. You think about like the world's fastest plane, the SR-71. That was government funding. We put people on the moon with government funding. We created atomic energy with government funding. And then things like GPS is government funding. The Weather Service is government. Like all of these things came from government funding.
Right.
Velcro and microwaves is through NASA. All of this stuff came because we put public money behind it and then they just licensed it to private companies. But innovation comes from what we choose to fund, not really from the private sector as much as we like to believe it does. And I think that if we chose to fund to cure cancer or whatever myriad of health problems we'd like to tackle, if we decided that we were going to do it, and like JFK said, we're going to put a man on the moon before the end of the decade, and we decided to put the funding behind it to achieve that sort of thing, we could do it, and it would arguably be more innovative than privatized.
Right. No, you took the words right out of my mouth. That was one of the things I was going to say next. From like so many things that we just take for granted every day, like even Velcro was because of public funding. That does not stifle innovation. Lack of competition is what stifles innovation.
Right, which is the type of economy we're experiencing right now.
Exactly. And right now, healthcare has such a massive control over who gets what. Like there's not any competition even with healthcare for providers, because specific careers can dictate what kind of healthcare you have. You don't get to decide that a lot of the time. So yeah, but that's the way it is in a lot of industries.
Well, and that was kind of my point with specific career-specific jobs having control over, like, you may hate the job you work for. You may have a really great idea to start a new company that could be really competitive and could revolutionize an industry, but you can't afford to leave your job not because you maybe can't pay the bills, but because you would literally die without the health care that they provide you, or you would not be able to afford that health care without it. And that would be...
Or you just think of your kids. Like, I can't have my wife and kids not
Covered.
not have health care if I'm the only person who has a job, or I'm the only person who has a job that provides health care.
And healthcare is one of those, like just like what you said, healthcare is one of those things where it actually stifles innovation in many different aspects. It's not even just healthcare. Since healthcare is locked to employment, it stops people from being competitive in specific markets. It stops people from leaving their jobs and going to a place that might pay better or is in a better area. It stops people from leaving. It stops people from going on strike a lot of the time, because how are they going to pay for healthcare? What if they What if they stop getting paid for so and so months and lose their policy? It stifles not only innovation but progress in so many aspects of our lives.
And in that same vein, I think to segue a little bit here, education is very similar. Education costs, and then being saddled with the debt of going to school to get a better education, ends up doing the same thing. You know, I mean, one of the benefits of education is, you know, more smart is more good, usually, right? And
No, that's why we need our kids to work in their high school years instead of going to school, obviously.
Right. And obviously that's the reason for minimum wage, right? It's for high schoolers. No, like, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And now they want to lower the minimum working age, you know, because we need it really to be middle schoolers. That's what minimum wage needs to be for, is middle schoolers now. We shouldn't be waiting to high school to get them out into the workforce.
Right.
Again, paying for everybody to go to school, you get all the, oh, it's socialism, the world's going to end, who's going to pay for it bullshit. But free education and getting rid of student debt helps capitalism in so many ways. Just to begin with, obviously you have a higher educated workforce, which means they're going to be more productive, more efficient at their jobs. Higher education means higher earnings. That's more money that they get to spend in the economy. And that's also more tax revenue that they generate, because obviously when your income goes up, so does the amount of taxes you pay until you get to a certain level. And then just not spending money on, this goes back to having more disposable income from making more, but also if you don't have to pay student loans, you're also have that money to spend elsewhere, which then goes back into the economy, and that increases GDP, increases jobs.
Goes back to the economy in the form of, buying cars and houses and being able to afford to have kids and
stuff people need to make
Yeah.
and build. You know, it takes jobs to do those
I don't
things.
know. I feel like you should be stuck with that student debt instead. It's
No,
probably
absolutely.
better use for the economy's dollars.
Definitely.
Yeah, the list is limitless for all of the benefits of society if people just had education, right? Or if people were able to just go to education. And the thing is, we don't need to remove the private option. Just like healthcare, we don't need to remove the private option. The private option, if it's ridiculous, will go away by itself, or it will improve by itself. If we had we already have public schools, if we make those affordable. Exactly. If they can't compete with the private or with the public option, it shouldn't exist. And it won't if we have a public option that actually competes. We already have public schools. Let's make those affordable first.
And we have private schools too. They can coexist, right? There's obviously different options that they offer that make them competitive. Like the post office, which obviously isn't really paid through by taxpayer money, but the post office is a public option that's a nonprofit option for parcel delivery, but you still have FedEx and UPS and private options you can send the stuff through that works just fine. So these things can coexist.
It's the perfect epitome of how the public option does service the entire country and a privatized option does not. I mean, there's no way that Amazon does the USPS deliveries.
Right.
So, and you have to do them for Amazon. So the public is subsidizing Amazon because they don't want to do it because that's a private company's, that's just their choice. And as a public option, you don't get that choice. And so you see the results of who is affected. Rural communities are the ones that are affected by pulling out the public option.
Yeah. And to another point is that the post office keeps FedEx and UPS's prices more reasonable, as would any public option for healthcare or education. You know, if you had free education, if you're going to have a private school, you're going to need to have a more competitive option.
Right. Why should you pay $20,000 a semester to go do this?
You better
school?
offer something substantial for that service. And same with health insurance. If you maintain a privatized or some sort of private health insurance option as well, or private doctors or something along those lines, they're going to have to offer some service that makes them worthwhile, and that's better for everyone.
Sounds like socialism to me.
It is absolutely socialism. That's why we can't do it.
Well, and it's funny to me because all this is just regulated, or all this is it's still free market capitalism, just like what you were saying earlier. This still isn't socialism.
Right.
You know, This, of course, a lot of people say that it is, but this is not communism or socialism. This is just a competitive market. This is still very much capitalism. And this is actually what capitalism was intended to be.
It was supposed to be like if people went back and learned about what the free hand or the invisible hand of the market was, they would call that socialism today. If they read The Wealth of Nations in a context of how we view capitalism today, they'd be like, Karl Marx wrote this shit. This is straight up communism. If you really, because he says the wealthy people should be paying for people to go to school and for make sure people can eat and have all of the services that they need. The rich people should be providing that to the workers.
Of course, it's the same reason a lot of people call FDR a socialist now, which is funny to me. But yeah,
and yeah, like I always say on the podcast, like I don't really care if like communism or socialism actually can work. When you put the meat to the grindstone of the orphan crushing machine, these things will help people, and you'll be moving towards a more egalitarian society. So I don't really care what you call it. I think it's moving towards a socialist society. So, like, I call it that, but, like,
yeah,
whatever, man.
Just take a few steps in the right direction. I don't think we're going to shake our capitalist coils, but I think that we can make it a more equitable society for everybody.
Right.
I think one of the other things I just wanted to go over is like universal child care and parental leave would be another thing that would have these huge economic impacts that would benefit capitalism and the free market. You'd have people more able to work. You'd have people more able to be invested in the workforce. You'd have people having babies, to make more cheap labor for the wealthy people that they want so bad. All they'd have to do is just give us just some breadcrumbs of childcare, and more people would probably be having children. And it's these kinds of things that I don't understand why they push so hard against. Because again, it would make everybody's life better, including the people who profit off of all of our labor.
Especially when you look at parental leave. That's something that that's something that most developed countries have. That we have undeniable proof benefits society, no matter what kind of society you live in. We have the research showing from all around the world that paid parental leave works. It benefits everyone, from employers to the employed. Like, we know that it helps. There's no reason not to implement it. The only reason that I can think of that people say not to implement paid parental leave is this mindset that women are supposed to not work somehow. Like when they bring sexism into it.
Then you're dealing with a whole different set of ideologies that we're not going to find common ground on there.
Exactly. Like when you talk about that, we can't even talk.
Yeah, we talk about these things. And it's always like, that sounds great, but our votes don't matter. We hear this all the time. Our votes do not matter. Big business owns all of our politicians, which is true. And there's just no way we can make these things a reality, which is why you need to vote for the guy with brainworms.
He had a brainworm.
It's still in there. It died. They didn't take it out.
They didn't take it out yet. Or
they didn't take it out.
As far as I know,
I thought it was gone, but maybe they didn't take it out.
Maybe it dissolved. Does brains eat worms when the brain-eating worm dies? Who knows? Anyway.
Oh man.
This is something that you go over a lot, and I just kind of figured I would let you take it away because you have articulated, I think, better than anybody I've seen on the platform on how we can make these things a reality in a reasonable timeline. It's just we all have to get on board and realize that, we can't have voter roll-off, ballot roll-off, down ballot roll-off, whatever it's called, where people don't vote all the way down the ballot. Primaries fucking matter. Primaries fucking matter. I don't know how many times I have to scream it. Primaries fucking matter.
If you vote in any election, make it be the primary. Yeah.
So please, just run through how we make these things happen for, all the people in the backs.
Let's see if I can. I posted a video a couple of days ago that I had to rehearse. Like I had to script like several times to fit it in that one video, and that video was still 7 minutes long. But it is in all actuality very easy. The first thing to remember is, even though the fact that that we have corporate money going into our politicians, there are so many things. There are so many nuances to that people just refuse to accept or don't know about. First off, when corporate money goes into political campaigns, that doesn't buy votes directly. That buys attention. That buys that buys attention from voters. That buys sometimes misinformation. If every single person in the country looked up the politicians who are running, what their views are, what their vote history was, if every single person knew about all politicians, that political funding would not matter. The DNC can spend as much money as it wants to, getting out awareness, saying, hey, you should vote for this candidate, or sending mail or telling people to vote on what days for what candidates. That would not matter if everybody knew what candidate they wanted to vote for and they actually showed up to the polls. And there are ways to find that out. OpenSecrets.org tracks all political funding. If you go and look up who's on the ticket in the primaries, go find out where their money is coming from. Just go to OpenSecrets.org. It takes like 10 minutes and see which candidate you agree with the most when it comes to where their money is coming from. Go look up, if one of them's an incumbent, look up what they voted on. You can go to Congress.gov and look up every single bill that they voted on. Vote for the one that you agree with the most. Go to the primaries and do this every single time. Now, states that don't have open primaries, that's a question I get all the time. If you're registered as independent, are you voting in independent primaries, or are you just registered as independent because you don't like either party? If you don't like either party, and that's the only reason, if you're not voting in, if you're not a part of an independence campaign, what are you doing? Register as the party where you would vote in a primary, right? When you register for a party, you're not saying, I support this party, I am loyal to this party. When you register for a party, you're saying, I want to vote for a candidate in that primary, or in that party. That doesn't mean that you support them. That means that you want to make change within that party.
And part of that too is that some places require you to be registered with a party to vote in their primaries. Some places don't. But obviously, if you want to have that voice in who that party, who your options are going to be to vote for in a general, being registered with a party, if your party requires that, is important.
Right, exactly. I get into conversations all the time with people who say that they're registered independent in a closed primary state, and then I ask them what they're voting for within, like, what primaries they're voting for, how active they are with third parties. And they can't tell me because they don't actually vote in the primary. There is no reason for them to be registered as independents. They're not gaining anything from it. So, yeah, register with the party that you want to change. You're not saying that you support the party by registering for that party. You're saying that you want to make change within that party. I don't know. I could go on to this for days. The fact that we can track political funding, the fact that we can track bills.
Right. But just beyond that, even, you've been talking about what the big steps we can take to get ranked choice voting, or get,
Oh my God, yes.
Get rid of the Electoral College, which sounds insurmountable, but
we're almost there. Like statewide elections, get your state to sign on for the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. We're 77% of the way there right now. We could have a third party elected by the next presidency, if we wanted to. And ranked choice voting is also statewide, by the way. So if you vote in your statewide elections, not just for governor, but state Congress, state Senate, get your state to sign up for the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. Get your state to sign up for get your state to enact ranked choice voting. We're there. And we're already, when it comes to bypassing the Electoral College, we're almost there already. We're 3/4 of the way to bypassing the Electoral College.
See, and this is why I really like the information that you put out here, is because it seems very doom and gloom when you look at this, and all of the change seems so insurmountable when there is this much money and this easily manipulated representation in Congress, obviously with gerrymandering and the Electoral College, and we've had, in my lifetime, 2 unpopular vote presidents win the presidency. We have Congress that in many states get 30 or 40% of the vote and still hold a majority of congressional seats and things like that. And it seems so difficult to change, where you really get kind of that, you get comfortable with the apathy of, I'm going to accept what I can't change. But the fact that you've laid it out so clearly on how these things can be changed and the very actionable steps we can take to do it, I don't know how to scream that louder, and that's why we kind of wanted you on here today. Is I want more people to hear this, and it's really frustrating that this isn't more mainstream talking points from progressive candidates. And I don't know why that is, if it's just too complicated, too in the weeds. Obviously, you are much more in the math than most of us are, but I don't know what the reason is.
A lot of it is because many progressives, especially leftists, believe that there's no change within the system. Now, I don't think it's most leftists. I think it's the loud minority. And as a leftist, I go about as far left as most leftists in my comment section. All it takes is information. All it takes is learning how the system works. If you're one of those people who believe that, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are both evil and they're the only, and those people never change, just learn how the system works, and understand history, right? We had FDR as a president, and FDR wasn't perfect. He had a lot of flaws, but look at the policies that he enacted. We can do that again, we can do more than what FDR did. If we actually learn how the system works and how to enact these policies, and at what level of the government we need to enact these policies on. Somebody in the comment section here said that that their state passed the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, and then the governor vetoed it. If they keep the same House and Senate within that state, but then come this next election cycle, they change the governor, then that House and Senate within that state will realize we have a new governor, we can actually pass this. They'll introduce a new bill, and they'll pass it, and then that governor will sign it.
And that's the thing, is many things are, if at first you don't succeed, try again. In politics, bills get written, rewritten, rejected, changed, but eventually you end up with the legislation hopefully somewhat resembling what you were looking for, and you can't get discouraged because of the first time it fails.
Right.
And I think a lot of times people get that way, especially with, we're all Bernie people here, I think, and obviously it was really discouraging to see a progressive candidate that was hopefully going to represent kind of the changes that we wanted to see, and at least platform them, even if he couldn't succeed at getting any of that policy passed. And just not seeing that be successful is super disheartening. But it should also be heartening that you got it that far. We've got a real legitimate progressive candidate that far down the road, and there's a good chance that we can take that the next step next time. And it's the same thing with saying that, they got that legislation vetoed for the what is it called again? The compact to overrule the electoral vote. That got vetoed, but hey, it passed through Congress. It got all the way to the governor's desk, and it should have passed the governor's desk, and that means that it can again. And if you have the right person or the right pressure on that governor in the future, you could get there. And people need to look at that as less disheartening and more. It should be heartening. It should be encouraging that you got it that far, and hey, it just means we're that much closer to actually getting this done.
Somebody also commented here saying if somebody wants to run, they need funding. But there are many nonprofit organizations that are willing to partner you with the right people to get that possible. Run for something is one of them. If you live in a state if you live in a state, especially a red state, where most of your state Congress people are Republican, and they're either regressive or they're just moderate conservative. It doesn't matter. They're probably running uncontested, at least a few of them. And if your main complaint when you go to statewide elections or primary elections or even general elections is that you don't have any voting options, either you or somebody that you know needs to start running, and you can get funding no matter who you are. You can go to runforsomething.org and like talk to somebody there. They know how to run elections. They get people elected all the time. If you're going against somebody who is unopposed, chances are you have so many hidden voters that you didn't even know about. They don't even show up to elections because they know that there's nobody they can vote for. Once you show them there's somebody else, it doesn't matter what your policies are. It doesn't matter how much funding you have. If they see somebody else on the ticket, they'll click that button.
Do you think though that the rise of like Trump's popularity, especially in rural areas, and voting for just Republican candidates has affected that? Because I've seen a lot of like really fantastic candidates running for state and just federal positions in pretty rural areas, and it looks like they have a lot of support, but they really only end up with like 35% of the votes, and then they try maybe once or twice, and then they're like, well, I tried, and then he gets basically unopposed for the next 2 or 3 election
Right.
cycles. I mean, obviously I agree with you. I don't think that any Republican or Democrat should run unopposed, but
there are some big popular ones. Marjorie Taylor Greene, I don't remember her numbers, but she very rarely runs with adequate opposition. And the reason people keep voting for her is because they don't think that there's anybody else to vote for. People just don't come to the polls because they don't think that there's anybody else. And yes, the first election that you run, just like you're saying, you will probably fail the first election because people don't know to vote for you yet. Do it 2 or 3 times. Build up a following. It's just like social media. Once you start making a video, you're not going to get 1 million followers immediately. But once you do it for several years, if you produce good content, then people will know about you. The same thing with elections. If your name is on that ticket 3 elections in a row, somebody's going to look you up.
Well, and I think too, a lot of people always set their sights on federal races, on the sexy races, on the higher dollar races, and
Yes,
those
that is a
are
huge
you have a huge barrier of entry into those, but you can run for county commissioner, for school board, for mayor, for any number of local positions. Some of them aren't even elected. You can just get some name recognition by volunteering to be on a county planning commission or something like that,
Right.
and start understanding how the system works and affecting measurable change for you and your neighbors. I mean, that is where the change happens. It is not at the federal level. Your local politicians have more effect on your life than the president ever will, 90% of the time. And once you get there and you get that name recognition and you've knocked on some doors and you've, shaken babies and kissed hands and done all that, you have that ability to move up into those bigger elections because you have that name recognition, you have that weight, you have some donors behind you, and people see you. And a lot of times at that level, they do not give a shit what party you are. They give a shit because they know who you are personally, and party affiliation becomes much less important the more local you get.
Right. And one of the conversations that I have pretty regularly is you don't even need to volunteer a lot of the time. You don't need to sign up to be a part of something. Just go to city council meetings. Just sit in for those meetings. If you're there every single meeting for months, they'll start asking you questions. Because now you're the person there. You're the only person there that represents your entire community for these city council members. They'll start asking you questions if you're there, especially if you're in a small town.
Nope. And as they say, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And a lot of times the people who do show up to that are the people you don't want representing you or talking and speaking on your behalf. So it's worth showing up to them. And I know they're always late at night on like a day you don't want to be there after work or something. And they do suck to go to. I totally get that. But it's worth it, especially if you're passionate. It's hard to bitch about the problems in your area and politics in general if you don't show up to stuff like that and at least try to make a change. If you don't vote in the primaries, if you don't do all of the things that you have the power to do to affect change, your bitching is, it's not. We have no respect for it at that point.
Okay, so I agree with that. What you guys are saying, like obviously, like if you want to run for office, you should, but if you are just working your job and like living your life like 99% of America is. Like 99% of America isn't going to run for office. Like it's just A, it would make no sense,
yeah.
and B, it's a lot of work. Like you have to be committed to it. And so I'm not expecting that all of our listeners like go out and do that. I'm looking for a way that we can be engaged that doesn't require us to be in the system itself.
Absolutely.
And I think that's another side of things that people don't talk about as much.
Yeah. No, I 100%
Right.
agree, and that's what I was saying was not necessarily just you can show up to a city council meeting. You can show up and
Exactly.
vote in a primary. Like those are the things that you can do without getting overly involved.
I mean, or if we had a slightly more direct democracy, we could do ballot measures in a way that
True.
isn't like impossible to pass. You know, like we're in the 21st century where we all have smartphones,
Yeah.
and we can hear people debate about topics that we could be voting on, and we don't do any of that. It's like we're still living in the horse and buggy era.
I mean, the fact that we're fighting over paper ballots, like we still have to vote with
Right.
paper ballots in the 21st century. It's 2024, and you gotta put it inside of an envelope, inside of another envelope, inside of a third envelope, and fill everything out and mail it in, or you've got to drive to a physical location and go in and vote. It's fucking asinine. So yeah, but we could take a direct democracy approach for tons of legislation.
I mean, George W. Bush wouldn't be in office if we
Yeah.
didn't have paper elections, or if we didn't have paper polling. So
God, think about how different the world would be.
right, that one thing by itself would have changed the entire world.
What do you think about ballot measures?
Specifically, which ones?
What do you think about ballot measures and ballot initiatives as a principle, as a process?
Yeah, as a principal process or any specific ones. I know we've talked about specific ones on the podcast about like some really cool initiatives and some really fucked up ones, certainly, but it feels like it's not that bad of an option.
So yeah, and some states already have them, and so like when you're voting for a specific act directly, not through so that your city council doesn't have to, like if your state or local municipality has a specific ordinance that they want to pass, and it comes up to the public vote at your election. Many states already have that. I am 100% for that. However, to get more of that takes voting.
But we've been seeing that people are showing up for off-term elections for ballot measures and initiatives on things they find important. Obviously,
great.
women's health care has been huge, and you're seeing it in states like Ohio, where you'd never expect overwhelming turnout for a random day ballot initiative, but they did it. And I think that we need to be taking that a lot more seriously than we do.
We definitely do, and in some states are better at getting attention out than others, and but some states also have people like us, content creators, who are willing to get that attention out as well. I'm mutuals with a few content creators who literally that's all they talk about is ballot measures, things that you can vote on, every single election, every single year, and we need more of that. But with some states, some local municipalities if you want, some states and local municipalities don't have as much power in that, not have as much power, but the citizens don't have as much power for ballot initiatives, or they don't have as many voter protections. There's voter suppression happening. Some states aren't required to give you a day off to go vote, especially not for ballot initiatives. But when you look at all of these problems that stop us from going out and voting for these, you still have to vote for candidates that are willing to fix these problems. You can't just say,
Yeah.
Most local municipalities are not going to put early voting for a ballot initiative on a ballot initiative because they already don't like them. You have to vote for candidates who are willing to protect these or who are willing to give you more voting rights. And a lot of it as well is just awareness about what you have, even in heavily voter suppressed areas. I guess I'm getting off topic when I say this, but people talk about voter suppression all the time, like, oh, it's not a national holiday. How are marginalized communities going to get to that polling location that's you know, 4 miles away from their house, or 10 miles away from their house. A lot of people don't know that in many of these areas there are ways to help out with that from some nonprofits. There are nonprofits who are rideshare services that will take you to the elections, so you can go vote, and they'll take you back to your house. Many states have a mandatory paid time off on election days, any election day, regardless of the election. They are required, if they schedule you over polling hours, to give you 2 hours of time off, paid time off, to go and vote. Most people don't know that. And the state isn't making it very obvious either.
Right.
But you have to vote in people in order to protect ballot measures. You have to vote in people who are willing to make more things a ballot measure instead of passing by the local municipalities or city councils or state legislators. So, to get more ballot measures, you have to vote.
Which is also why I think it's important to remind people that they need to vote down ballot. Democrats have a horrible, horrible tendency to just vote top of the ticket and leave the booth with the rest of the ticket unchecked.
Yes.
And the fact that we do that is why many of these things don't change. Because if you're not, the people down the ticket are the people who are going to push these things through and get it so you can have ballot initiatives. You can get the policies that you want to see those are the people who write policies and affect the change, and not voting for them. If you just go in and vote for a president and maybe a senator or two or a federal congressman, you're not going to get the people there who can make the change that you're bitching about never happens. And that is one of the most frustrating things in the world. There's no excuse in 2024 if you feel too uneducated to just vote blue ticket all the way down. There's no excuse to not go Google the people all the way down before you go, or mail in your vote, and you've got all the time in the world to look up every single person on there if you want. Absolutely do early voting. We're kind of running out of time here. I just kind of wanted to cover one more topic with you on money in politics. Obviously, AIPAC's been a huge talk, just money in politics in general, super PACs and whatnot, but then AIPAC has obviously gotten a ton of attention, and Citizens United has not really been challenged in any meaningful way since it got ruled on by the Supreme Court. You know, Obama obviously said he was going to go in there and run against it, and then he's like, holy shit, I can raise a shit ton of money with this. I ain't overturning this, and never did. Just your thoughts on loosening, obviously, a foreign country's influence over our political system with AIPAC, and then just super PACs in general, since you always have so many actionable steps on how we can make these things happen. I was wondering if you had any on those.
Yeah. So for actionable steps, let's talk about AIPAC first. So I have I put together a spreadsheet that shows like a rating spreadsheet for House reps. I want to expand this to the Senate as soon as possible, ideally before this election. But right now it's just all House reps. And money from Israel or money from Israel activist groups in general, not just AIPAC, but all of them, is a part of that spreadsheet. And what I try to encourage people to do is either make your own spreadsheet, or you could use mine if you want to. When you go and look to see how many candidates are funded by Israel activist groups, you'd be surprised at how few they are. Now, most people are saying, oh, everybody's bought by AIPAC. And depending on the year, you can see that AIPAC maybe put $50 to $100 in one of those candidates' pockets. But $50 to $100 just means they're tossing out money to see what sticks. That doesn't mean that they're actively involved with that candidate. If you can go in the spreadsheet that I made, that's free on my website, you can go and put a dollar amount that you're comfortable with. And when you put that dollar amount in, you find out that only about a third of people are getting money from in the House of Representatives are getting money from Israel activist groups, like real money.
Still a lot. I
Pretty
mean,
darn high for a foreign.
I mean, a third is a lot, but that third you can vote. Vote that third out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you go and look it up, the fact that we only have to change 30% of it, or even the fact that a third doesn't represent a majority. If we kept everybody else, and even if we can't vote out all of the people, if you're super against Israel funding, we can still override legislation that third has, or that third votes for. But this is true with everything. When you look at gun rights activist groups, when you look at big oil companies, everything, you can measure where that money comes from. If you have a candidate, even within your party, that wants to, or that raises money from these organizations, even though you can't vote them out in the general election, you can certainly vote them out in the primaries. Because many local elections, many Senate elections, House elections, statewide elections, some of them still have primaries for these candidates, even if they have incumbents. It's not like the presidential election where every single time there's an incumbent, you just don't get to vote for anybody else.
Right.
You can still find candidates to vote for. And now, when you get to the general election, unfortunately, if you didn't vote in the primaries, you didn't kick those people out early, you have to vote for the lesser of two evils. But you can go find out which people are taking money from where. And if there's nobody, once we narrow it down to where there's 5% of them taking money from an organization that you don't like, then it's not like most of them won't change their mind, right? They'll have,
Right.
most of them have been in the House or been in the Senate for that long without taking that money. They're not going to just switch, especially if they find out that they're losing votes for it.
That's all excellent information, and obviously I think everybody should check out your spreadsheets on that, and happy to learn that it's not as widespread as a lot of us are kind of being led to believe on that sort of issue, and that it's hopefully a surmountable problem. But then just quickly, do you have any actionable steps on Citizens United overturning or trying to get that money out of politics?
Unfortunately, with Citizens United, that was a Supreme Court decision. So Supreme Court can overturn it, but you have to have Supreme Court justices in there who are willing to overturn it, just like what happened with the Roe v. Wade case. That's not going to happen for a while. That's not going to happen for a very long time. Now, we can overrule that decision in Congress, which comes back to the previous conversation about voting for people who don't get funding.
Vote in primaries, vote down ballot.
Congress overruling the Supreme Court is hard. That could be an entire life.
Is it harder than a supermajority requirement?
Well, there's a lot of steps to it, yeah. And I'm going to need to reverse myself in all of it. But yeah, it requires a supermajority, and it also, I don't remember all the steps needed, but it's a whole thing.
It's a whole thing, and not things that we can necessarily take actionable steps on our level, but we can try to give the power, try to elevate and platform and give power to the people who do want to take those steps.
Right.
Or write legislation that would undermine Citizens United, because that could be done too. You could start writing legislation that would effectively weaken Citizens United advertising that's done under Citizens United.
One of the things that we can do that nobody talks about is on the state level as well. Now, for presidential, obviously state level won't help, but for state Congress, state Senate, U.S. Congress, U.S. Senate, each state can still pass restrictions on funding for candidates running. And this is also something that we can accomplish by the next, in the next 4 years. We can, if we all got together and told our states, hey, we're not going to vote for you if you don't pass, reasonable restrictions. Of course, the Supreme Court right now can get in the way of that, but we can fight against it. But the most important thing about Citizens United that I really want to get across is political funding. It doesn't directly buy votes, like we talked about earlier. Political funding buys attention. Political funding buys public appearance. Political funding buys a lot of different things. It buys how the public views you. But political funding does nothing if the public is well researched. If every single person in the population is well researched, the political Citizens United wouldn't have made a single difference, because everybody already knows who to vote for.
That makes perfect sense. We're running a little short on time here, so obviously our technical difficulties at the beginning didn't help anything.
That's fine.
But we we really appreciate having you on, and we would love to have you back again to hopefully make a little bit more smooth smooth transition through this next time and cover some of these topics, because there's a ton of topics that you have a lot of knowledge on that I think you provide really valuable insight to. So we,
Thanks.
again, just really appreciate having you on. If you do not follow Nick Powers on TikTok, it's that Nick Powers guy. Are you on Instagram and all the other socials as well?
I'm on everywhere.
Everywhere. So Instagram, YouTube, yep, do all the socials, that Nick Powers guy. Obviously, follow us on Let Them Eat Toast, follow Off Your Wagon. We have some subscription services, a Patreon up now that we're...
YouTube. Apple subscriptions is starting up for the podcast.
Yep. So we're trying to offer a little bit more content for that. You can buy merch at offjourwagon.com for both the podcast and my personal stuff. And is there anything you want to plug there, Nick?
I mean, sure. My book, As the Pizza Burns, you can get anywhere you buy books. Usually you can't find it in a brick and mortar store, but sometimes you can. But you can always get it online. Pretty much any bookstore you can buy it online. As the Pizza Burns by Nick Powers. But yeah, love your content, by the way. I didn't get a chance to tell you guys that, but I love your content. I'm a huge fan.
I appreciate that. I've been a huge fan for you, I think, even longer than you knew I existed, when somebody referred me to you kind of early on when you got started, and I absolutely love the numbers-based stuff and the facts-based stuff. Obviously, I try to do that in a little bit more snarky, sarcastic fashion, but I do not have the math capabilities, and I can barely operate a spreadsheet. So I honestly reference your material a lot just to fact-check my own stuff before I go make content, and I cannot tell you how much of a lifesaver that is.
It's always really refreshing when I see a tag coming from you.
Well... I appreciate that. Let's do this again. Let's do some more lives, too. This is fun. So,
Totally. Yeah.
I think we should do some more collaboration stuff. I really enjoyed talking with you here today. And thank you once again for being on, and we will see you all next week.
That's right. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in, guys. Bye.